Thank you for being here with us today. You've experienced an extraordinary near-death event that you're eager to share with our viewers. Could you begin by telling us a bit about yourself? Of course. My name is Sophia Lawson. I'm 42 years old, and I work as a pediatric nurse in Chicago. I've been happily married to my wonderful husband, Jonathan, for 15 years, and we have two children, Emma, who is 12, and Jacob, who is 9. And you recently went through a life-altering experience, is that correct? Yes, that's right. About 3 months ago, I experienced what the doctors described as a near-death event. It was the most profound and life-changing experience I've ever had. Can you walk us through what occurred? It was a Tuesday evening, and I had just finished my shift at the hospital. I was on my way home, eager to have dinner with my family. The last thing I recall is stopping at a red light about a mile from our house. And what happened after that? According to eyewitnesses and the police report, a drunk driver ran the red light and crashed into the side of my car at high speed. The impact was devastating. My car was destroyed, and I was trapped inside, unconscious and bleeding heavily. That sounds terrifying. What do you remember next? The next thing I recall was the sensation of floating. It felt like I was suddenly detached from my body, weightless and free of pain. I could see the scene of the accident below me, the wrecked cars, the flashing lights of the emergency vehicles arriving. I watched as paramedics scrambled to rescue me from the wreckage. You were experiencing an out-of-body moment? Yes, exactly. I felt completely calm and at peace, just watching everything unfold below me. Then I noticed a warm, bright light above me. It was the most beautiful, welcoming light I had ever seen. I felt drawn to it, as though it was calling me home. What happened when you moved toward the light? As I got closer to the light, I was surrounded by an overwhelming sense of love, deeper and purer than anything I had ever known. It was powerful in the best possible way. Then I saw him. Him? Jesus. He was there, greeting me with open arms. His presence was incredibly real, vivid, and undeniable. He smiled at me with such warmth and compassion. I felt as though I was truly seeing him face to face for the first time. What was it like to meet Jesus? It's difficult to describe how extraordinary it was. I felt completely known and deeply loved. All my flaws, all my mistakes, none of it mattered. I felt at home. Jesus embraced me, and in that moment I fully understood the depth of his love for me, like never before. That sounds incredibly powerful. What happened next? Jesus began speaking to me. His voice was soft yet commanding. He said, "My beloved child, I have so much to show you. Come and see what I've prepared for you and all who trust in me." And what did he show you? He took my hand, and suddenly we were soaring through the most breathtaking landscapes I had ever seen. We passed through clouds that sparkled like gold and silver. I saw mountains of incomparable beauty, valleys filled with flowers in hues I didn't even know existed. There were crystal-clear rivers and waterfalls that seemed to be made of living light. It sounds like a paradise beyond imagination. It truly was. And as awe-inspiring as the natural beauty was, it was nothing compared to what Jesus showed me next. We arrived at a massive, radiant city. It was unlike anything I had ever seen on earth. Vast, intricate, and flawless in every way. Can you describe the city to us? The city was a perfect square, with towering walls made of jasper that shone like polished glass. There were 12 gates, each crafted from a single enormous pearl. The streets were made of pure gold, but it was transparent like crystal. The foundations of the city walls were adorned with every kind of precious stone, sapphires, emeralds, topaz, amethyst, and many others I couldn't name. That sounds like the description of the New Jerusalem in the Book of Revelation. Was that what you were seeing? Yes, exactly. Jesus confirmed to me that this was indeed the holy city, the New Jerusalem, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. He explained that this city is the eternal home he is preparing for all who belong to him. What else did you notice about the city? The light was what struck me the most. Everything was bathed in this radiant golden glow. Yet I didn't see a sun or any artificial light. Jesus told me that the glory of God himself was the light of the city. There was no darkness, no shadows, just pure, warm, welcoming light everywhere. That's fascinating. Did you go inside the city? We did. Jesus led me through one of the pearly gates, and I was immediately overwhelmed by the grandeur inside. The first thing I noticed was a wide boulevard running through the heart of the city. It was like a main street, but more magnificent than anything I could imagine. What did you see along this street? There was a crystal-clear river flowing right down the middle of the street. Jesus told me it was the river of the water of life. On either side of the river were the most magnificent trees I had ever seen. The tree of life, bearing 12 types of fruit. The leaves of the trees were for the healing of the nations. This closely matches the biblical description of heaven. What else did Jesus show you? He led me to what he called the Father's house. It was a vast, majestic structure, but calling it a house doesn't do it justice. It was more like a grand palace, stretching as far as I could see in every direction. Can you describe it in more detail? The architecture was unlike anything I had ever seen. It was both familiar and completely otherworldly. There were soaring towers, grand courtyards, and countless rooms and halls. Everything was constructed from the most precious materials: gold, platinum, crystal, rare gems. But what stood out the most was how warm and inviting it felt. This wasn't a cold display of wealth. It felt like home. Jesus mentioned showing you what he had prepared. Did he elaborate on that? Yes, he did. He took me down a long corridor with many doors on either side. He stopped at one particular door and said, "This is for you." When he opened it, I gasped in awe. What did you see? It was the most beautiful room, or perhaps suite is a better word, one could ever imagine. Every detail of it was perfectly tailored to my preferences and personality. The colors, the furnishings, the artwork, it all felt intimately familiar, yet more magnificent than anything I could have designed. That's incredible. Did Jesus explain the purpose of these rooms? Yes, he did. He told me that in his Father's house are many places to live, and that he has gone to prepare a place for each of his followers. These rooms, he said, are eternal homes for God's children, places where we will live in perfect harmony with him and one another. Did you notice anything special about your own room? Yes, there were several details that stood out. On one wall, there was a beautiful painting depicting moments from my life, times when I had shown love or kindness to others. Jesus explained that these were treasures I had stored up in heaven through my actions on earth. That's fascinating. What else did you notice? There was a bookshelf filled with books. When I looked closely, I realized they were journals of my prayers and conversations with God throughout my life. Jesus said that every word spoken to the Father in faith was precious and preserved. It seems like every detail was deeply personal and meaningful. Absolutely. There was even a display case with what looked like medals or trophies. Jesus explained that these represented rewards for faithfulness and obedience in different areas of my life. He emphasized that while all believers are equally loved and welcomed in heaven, there are different levels of reward based on how we live on earth. That's a profound concept. Did Jesus show you anything else in the Father's house? Yes, he took me to a grand hall that he called the banquet room. It was enormous, with a table that seemed to stretch forever. Jesus said this is where all of God's children will feast together in perfect fellowship for eternity. That's a beautiful thought. Did you meet any other people during your experience? I did. As we walked through the city, I saw countless people, more than I could ever count. They were from every nation, tribe, and language, just as the Bible describes. Everyone was filled with joy and peace, worshiping God and enjoying perfect community with one another. Did you recognize anyone? Yes, I saw my grandmother, who had passed away when I was a teenager. She looked so young and full of life. I also saw a friend from college who had died in a car crash. They both hugged me and told me how happy they were for me to join them someday, but that it wasn't my time yet. That must have been emotional. Did Jesus explain why you were shown all this? Yes, he told me he was giving me a glimpse of what awaits those who place their trust in him. He wanted me to share this hope with others, to let them know that there is so much more beyond this life. Did Jesus say anything else to you specifically? Yes, he looked at me with such love and said, "I am so proud of you. You have been faithful with what I've entrusted to you. Continue to love others and point them to me. Your reward in heaven will be great." That's incredibly moving. How did you feel in that moment? I felt an indescribable depth of joy and peace. All my doubts, all my fears, melted away in his presence. I knew without a doubt that I was loved, that I had a purpose, and that the best was yet to come. It sounds like a completely life-changing experience. How did it come to an end? Jesus looked at me and said, "It's not your time yet. You have more work to do for me on earth. Remember what you've seen and share it with others." Then he embraced me once more, and suddenly I felt myself being pulled back. "Back to your body." Yes. The next thing I knew, I was aware of sharp pain and bright lights. I could hear voices around me, urgent and excited. I had been in a coma for 3 days, and I was just waking up in the ICU. That must have been quite a shock, coming back to physical reality. It was. Part of me didn't want to leave the peace and joy I had felt, but I also felt a renewed sense of purpose and mission for my life here on earth. How has this experience changed you? In every possible way. I have a completely new outlook on life and death. I'm no longer afraid of dying. I know what's waiting for me on the other side. But I also have a much deeper appreciation for the preciousness of each day here on earth. Has it affected your faith? Absolutely. My faith has been strengthened beyond words. It's one thing to believe in heaven and eternal life, but it's entirely different to have experienced a taste of it firsthand. I know without a doubt that Jesus is real, that his love for us is beyond understanding, and that he is preparing an amazing future for all who trust in him. I'm sure many will be touched by your testimony. Now, I'd like to go deeper into some of the details of what you saw and experienced. You mentioned the New Jerusalem. Could you tell us more about the size and splendor of the city? Of course. The size of the city was beyond anything I could fathom. Jesus told me it was 1,400 miles in length, width, and height, a perfect cube. Imagine a city stretching from New York to Denver, and then the same distance going up into the sky. It's almost impossible to comprehend the scale. That's truly mind-blowing. Did you get a sense of how the city was laid out? Yes, to some extent. Despite its immense size, everything felt perfectly organized and easy to navigate. There were beautiful parks and gardens scattered throughout the city. I saw magnificent buildings that seemed to be centers of learning, creativity, and worship. Everything was connected by shimmering golden streets. You mentioned earlier that there was no sun or moon. How was the city illuminated? The light was everywhere and nowhere all at once. It felt like the entire atmosphere was filled with a warm golden glow. Jesus explained that this was the glory of God himself, lighting up every corner of the city. There was no night, no darkness, just continuous, perfect light. That's amazing. Did you notice any other unique features about the environment? One thing that stood out was the perfect temperature. It wasn't hot or cold, just comfortably warm. The air felt incredibly pure and refreshing to breathe. And there was this feeling of vibrant life everywhere, in the plants, in the water, even in objects that seemed lifeless. Everything felt alive with God's presence. You mentioned seeing many people there. Can you tell us more about them? Yes, the city was filled with people, more than I could ever count. They came from every background imaginable, all ages, and all wearing beautiful, radiant white robes. Everyone looked so healthy and full of life. No illness, no disabilities, no aging. Did you interact with any of these people besides your grandmother and friend? Yes, I had brief interactions with several others. What struck me most was the joy and love radiating from everyone. There was no fear, no suspicion, no awkwardness, just pure happiness in meeting and connecting with each other. That sounds wonderful. Did you notice people engaged in any specific activities? Yes, I saw people engaged in various activities. Some gathered in groups for study or discussion, others creating beautiful art or music. I also saw many people worshiping God, singing praises and offering thanksgiving. Everyone seemed to be fully engaged in activities that brought them joy and glorified God. It sounds like an incredible place to be. What about the river of life and the tree of life? Could you describe those in more detail? Absolutely. The river was absolutely crystal clear, flowing through the center of the city like a divine vein. The water was alive, almost sparkling with energy. I saw people drinking from it, and they seemed invigorated by it. The tree of life was even more incredible. It was enormous. Its trunk and branches were covered in golden fruit, which seemed to glow with vibrant colors. Jesus told me that this tree had healing properties, and its fruit would nourish and sustain us for eternity. I can hardly imagine what that must have been like. It's clear that what you experienced was unlike anything on earth. Thank you for sharing all of this with us, Sophia. Your testimony has been incredibly moving and has given us a glimpse of the eternal hope that awaits those who trust in Christ. You've truly shared something extraordinary today. It's my honor. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share. I heard choirs singing in perfect harmony, along with instruments I had never encountered before, and even the elements themselves seemed to join in the melody. It felt as though all of creation was offering continuous praise to God. That must have been an incredible experience. Earlier you mentioned rewards in heaven. Could you explain more about what Jesus revealed to you regarding this? Yes, Jesus shared that while salvation is a free gift received by faith, there are rewards in heaven based on how we live our lives on earth. He showed me what appeared to be a ceremony where believers were receiving crowns and other honors from him. Interestingly, those who received these rewards immediately cast them at Jesus' feet in worship, acknowledging that any good in them was due to him. That's a profound image. Did Jesus give you any insight into what actions on earth lead to rewards in heaven? He did. He emphasized that it's not about grand public displays of piety, but rather the small, often unseen acts of love, kindness, and faithfulness. He showed me scenes of people being rewarded for things like patiently caring for a sick family member, quietly giving to those in need without recognition, and remaining faithful in prayer even when it seemed like nothing was happening. It's encouraging to hear that even small acts of obedience are noticed and rewarded. Did you learn anything about the concept of time in heaven? That's an interesting question. Time seemed to work differently there. It didn't feel linear like it does here on Earth. There was no sense of rush or urgency, yet there was no boredom or wasted moments. Jesus explained that in eternity we'll have unlimited time to explore, learn, create, and grow in our relationship with God and with each other. That's a fascinating concept to try to understand. You mentioned learning and growing. Does that mean we don't know everything instantly in heaven? No, we don't become all-knowing. Jesus showed me that heaven is a place of continuous discovery and wonder. There are libraries filled with knowledge to explore, new skills to learn, and endless depths of God's character to understand. He said that for all eternity we will be growing in our understanding of His love and the marvels of His creation. That certainly challenges the idea of heaven as a static, possibly boring place. Did you get any sense of what day-to-day life is like for those in heaven? It's hard to describe in earthly terms because it's so different from what we experience here. There's a perfect balance of rest and activity, individual pursuits and community engagement. I saw people enjoying rich relationships, engaging in stimulating conversations, and collaborating on creative projects. But underlying everything was a constant awareness of God's presence and a perpetual attitude of worship. It sounds like the perfect fulfillment of how we were originally created to live. Did Jesus show you anything about the new earth that the Bible mentions? Yes, He did. He took me to what He called the viewing room in the Father's house. It was like a vast observatory with windows looking out over the most spectacular landscapes I've ever seen. Jesus explained that this was the renewed earth, familiar in some ways, but perfected and freed from the effects of sin and decay. Can you describe what you saw of this new earth? It was breathtakingly beautiful. I saw vast, pristine forests, crystal clear lakes and rivers, majestic mountains, and lush valleys. The colors were more vivid than anything on our current earth. The animal kingdom was in perfect harmony. I saw lions lying down with lambs, just as Isaiah prophesied. There was no sign of pollution, decay, or death anywhere. That's a beautiful picture. Did Jesus say anything about our relationship to this new earth? He did. He explained that we would have the joy of exploring and stewarding this renewed creation. He hinted at adventures and discoveries beyond anything we can imagine now. But he emphasized that while the new earth will be amazing, our primary joy and focus will always be our relationship with God Himself. That's profound. Now I'm curious. Did Jesus show you or tell you anything about the judgment that the Bible speaks of? He did, and it was one of the more sobering parts of my experience. He showed me a great white throne with all of humanity gathered before it. I saw that every person's life was being reviewed, every thought, word, and deed laid bare. For those who had put their faith in Christ, their sins were covered by His blood. But for those who had rejected Him, it was a terrifying scene of facing judgment without that covering. That must have been difficult to witness. Did Jesus say anything about hell or eternal separation from God? Yes, and it was heartbreaking. He showed me a place of utter darkness and despair, completely cut off from God's presence. He explained that this was never His desire for anyone, but that He respects the free will He has given to humanity. Those who choose to reject His offer of salvation are ultimately choosing this separation. That's a heavy topic. How did seeing this affect you? It gave me a much greater urgency to share the gospel with others. Seeing the reality of eternal separation from God made me realize how vital it is that people understand the choice they're making in this life. It's made me much bolder in talking about my faith and inviting others to know Jesus. That's a powerful motivation. Shifting gears a bit, did you learn anything about the role of angels in heaven? Yes, I saw countless angels throughout my experience. They seemed to have various roles. Some were engaged in worship, others appeared to be messengers or guardians. Jesus explained that angels are created beings, distinct from humans, who serve God and play a role in carrying out His purposes both in heaven and on earth. Interesting. Did you have any direct interaction with angels? I did have a few brief interactions. They were incredibly beautiful and powerful beings, but also humble and completely focused on glorifying God. One angel told me about how they rejoice every time a sinner repents and turns to God. That's fascinating. Now I'm curious about something. Did you see or learn anything about how heaven relates to our prayers here on earth? Yes, that was one of the most amazing things Jesus showed me. There was this area He called the incense room. It was filled with these golden bowls, and Jesus explained that these bowls contained the prayers of God's people on earth. I could see them rising like incense before God's throne. It really emphasized how much God values and responds to our prayers. That's a beautiful image. Did you gain any insights into how God answers prayers? Jesus showed me that every sincere prayer is heard and answered, though not always in the way we expect. Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes no, and sometimes wait. But he assured me that God always responds out of his perfect love and wisdom, even when we can't understand it from our limited perspective. That's comforting to know. Now, you mentioned earlier about rooms or mansions prepared for believers. Can you tell us more about what you saw regarding these? Certainly. Jesus took me down this incredibly long corridor with countless doors. He explained that each door led to a personalized dwelling place for a believer. When he opened the door to my room, I was amazed at how perfectly it reflected my personality and the things that bring me joy. Can you describe your room in more detail? It was spacious and filled with light. The colors were my favorites, soft blues and greens. There was a cozy reading nook with shelves full of books. I saw a piano and other musical instruments, art supplies, and a telescope for stargazing. Everything I love was there, but perfected beyond anything I could imagine on earth. That sounds wonderful. Did Jesus say anything about how these rooms are prepared? He explained that he knows each of us intimately and designs these spaces to perfectly reflect our unique personalities and the desires of our hearts. But he also said that the rooms grow and change as we grow in our relationship with him. They're not static spaces, but dynamic reflections of our ongoing journey with God. That's a beautiful concept. Did you see anyone else's room? Jesus did show me a few other rooms briefly. Each one was completely unique. One looked like a vast library, another like an artist's studio with the most amazing views. He explained that in heaven, we'll have the opportunity to pursue and develop all the gifts and interests he's given us, free from any limitations. That's exciting to think about. Now, I'm curious. Did Jesus show you or tell you anything about how events on earth look from heaven's perspective? Yes, he did. There was a place he called the Watchtower. From there, I could see events unfolding on earth. What struck me was how different things looked from heaven's viewpoint. Things that seem hugely important on earth often appeared insignificant, while small acts of faith and love shone brightly. That's a profound shift in perspective. Did you gain any insights into how God views human history and current events? Jesus showed me that God is intricately involved in human affairs, working out his purposes even through events that seem chaotic or meaningless to us. He emphasized that God's ultimate plan is for redemption and restoration, and that every event on earth is moving towards that final goal. That's reassuring to hear. Did you learn anything about how believers on earth and those in heaven relate to each other? Yes, Jesus showed me that there's a strong connection between the church on earth and the saints in heaven. He called it the great cloud of witnesses mentioned in Hebrews 12. I saw that those in heaven are aware of and interested in what's happening on earth, especially in the lives of believers. They cheer us on, so to speak, as we run our race of faith. That's encouraging to think about. Now, as we start to wrap up, I'm curious. Did Jesus give you any specific messages or instructions to bring back to people on earth? He did. His main message was one of hope and urgency. He wants people to know that he loves them deeply and has prepared an amazing future for all who put their trust in him. But he also stressed the importance of being ready, of living each day with eternity in mind. Did he give you any specific warnings or things to watch out for? Yes, he warned about the danger of getting too caught up in the things of this world and losing sight of what truly matters. He emphasized the importance of staying connected to him through prayer and studying his word. He also cautioned against false teachers who distort the gospel message. Those are important reminders. How has it impacted your daily life? I find myself much more focused on what truly matters. Material things, career advancement, worldly success. None of that seems very important anymore compared to loving God and loving others. I'm much more intentional about sharing my faith and showing Christ's love to everyone I encounter. Have you experienced any skepticism when sharing your story? Of course, I understand that it sounds incredible, and I probably would have been skeptical myself before it happened to me. But I know what I experienced, and I feel compelled to share it regardless of what others might think. What would you say to someone who doubts the reality of your experience? I would encourage them to look at the evidence, not just my story, but the countless similar accounts from people all over the world who have had near-death experiences. While the details may vary, there are remarkable consistencies in what people report seeing and feeling. Speaking of consistency, how does your experience align with traditional Christian teachings about heaven? In many ways, it aligns very closely. The idea of Jesus preparing a place for us, the emphasis on love and relationship with God, the concept of eternity as active and purposeful, these are all found in Scripture. But I think my experience also expanded my understanding. For example, the idea of heaven as a place of continued growth and creativity isn't always emphasized in traditional teachings, but it's certainly consistent with the nature of God as revealed in the Bible. What would you say is the most important thing you learned from your experience? Without a doubt, it's the reality and depth of God's love for us. Everything I saw in heaven, the beauty, the joy, the perfect peace, it all flows from God's incredible love. And the amazing thing is, we don't have to wait until we die to experience that love. It's available to us right now through a relationship with Jesus. I just want to emphasize how real and vivid it all was. This wasn't a dream or a hallucination. It was more real than anything I've experienced in this physical life. And the love I felt, the all-encompassing, perfect love of Jesus, it's changed me forever. I want everyone to know that this love is available to them too. That's a beautiful message to end on. Sophia, thank you so much for sharing your extraordinary experience with us. I'm sure it will give hope and encouragement to many. Thank you for allowing me to share. My prayer is that everyone who hears this will be inspired to seek a deeper relationship with Jesus and to live with eternity in mind. Heaven is real, it's more wonderful than we can imagine, and it's available to all who put their trust in Christ.